We need to talk about compression. A lot of people make it seem so complicated, but it's not really that complicated of a tool. And what it can do can really shape the dynamics in your mix in a way that's very important and very impactful. So today, we're just going to go through the entire compression process. We're going to put compression on all the individual tracks in our session, and I'm going to walk you through it in real time so you can see exactly how I do it in my mixes. But before we get into it, if you don't already have it, be sure to grab my 6-step checklist to a pro mix. It's completely free from link in the description below, and it just goes through the 6 steps that all professional mixes have and how to do them specifically inside Logic. This video series that we're in right now, this is the 4th video in a video series. We're going through that 6-step process in real time together, but that guide will allow you to follow along with it anytime you're working on your music in the future, so you don't have to keep coming back to these videos. You can just quickly reference that while you're mixing. Okay, let's go and jump into Logic. Now, I know this compressor can look confusing, but don't let it be. There's only a few things you really need to understand to use this compressor. So I like to think of compression as an automatic volume fader. So imagine a fader like on a mixing console, or like we have here in Logic, any of these faders. So picture that fader, and then you set a threshold. And anytime sound passes that threshold, it gets turned down. But how quickly it gets turned down really affects the sound. So if you let the sound come through a little bit, then it's going to poke through, cut through, feel a bit punchier, feel a bit livelier in the mix, right? So let it through a little bit. You do that by having a slow attack time, so it lets it through and then it turns it down. Or if you make it a really, really fast attack time, then it's basically going to contain the dynamics a little bit more and shape them. So it might tuck it back in the mix a little bit more, or it might just make it a little bit flatter and fatter so it kind of feels beefier. That's a fast attack time. So you could make it, let it cut through and then get turned down, or where it hits that compressor and basically immediately gets turned down. So fast attack time smashes it down, slow attack time lets it through, makes it pokey. Release time is how quickly it releases back up. So if you have a slow release time, then it's going to turn down anything in between the big hits. If you have a fast release time, then it's going to bring up all the subtleties in between the big hits. So that can help bring out subtleties in your performance or bring out the room sound in a drum track. We'll look at that in a minute. And then your ratio is essentially just how intense it is. So just think of that as how intense it's turning it down. Technically, it's how much it's letting through, but just think of it as kind of an intensity knob. And then your makeup gain, you just dial up to make up any volume lost, because it is compressing the sound, turning it down. So those are the main elements of this compressor. Now we have this on a drum track. We're going to start with this on drums. This is just the drum bus from the producer kit. So the one place that all your drums are running together. So this is our entire drum sound in one place. And I like to start there on my drums just to dial in a little bit of liveliness. So without this compressor, it sounds fine, but it's a little bit dull. It's a little bit flat sounding. So I want to use this compressor to make it a little bit punchier and make it just a little livelier feeling, kind of moving with the drums a little bit more. So I'm going to start by bringing my threshold up so that it's not actually engaging anything. I'm going to have a 3-to-1 ratio, which is kind of just a good general ratio. It's not too intense, but it's enough that it will be noticeable. Sometimes on drums I might go higher, but here we're just going to start with a 3-to-1. And then attack time, I really want to let things cut through, so I'm going to go around 20 milliseconds here. Maybe a little bit slower. You can get a little bit faster with this, but around 15 to 20 milliseconds is a pretty good starting point. And then I think in this case, I'll start with the auto release on, which is fine. But a lot of times with drums, I'll turn it off and I'll dial my release to be more in time with the song. So we'll play around with that and see what we like better in just a minute. I'm going to turn the auto gain off. That's the first thing you should absolutely do. Never use auto gain. It just throws off the perception because it turns it up, and it's not necessarily going to be a 1-to-1, or it's almost never going to be a 1-to-1. So it's going to make it louder in most cases, which might make you think you like the sound of it better, but really it's just turning it up. So auto gain is off. And now let's just dial this in. We'll bring the threshold down until we're getting some compression. If I go down here, it's pretty extreme. So I'm just looking to do a little bit. We're just looking 3 to 5 decibels of compression on my entire drum bus here. So that is feeling pretty good to me. If I turn this off, it's a little bit louder. So let's go ahead and turn the makeup gain up a little bit here. Okay, so notice how the in-between of the hits is starting to come through a little bit more. It's letting that initial hit through, but then it's quickly releasing back up. So it feels livelier with this on. So punchier and livelier. Let's play around with the release here. If I set it to be slower. Bring it to be a little bit faster. There, it's basically just immediately releasing. I think I like the timing of this better in the auto. So auto is totally going to work for us here. Okay, let's go and dial in one of these emulations. These are emulating like real analog pieces of gear. I'll often do studio FET. I also like this vintage FET. And opto. Opto, notice you'll have to play around with your settings again, kind of dial them in to get compression. Optos just react differently. But I'm liking either this. I think I like this the best on this drum bus. I'm gonna bring the threshold down just a little bit. And then let's go ahead and dial in the distortion. This is just gonna add a little bit of saturation from like the analog emulation part of this. And dial back your output because it will turn it up just a little bit. Okay, so this is off. And back on. Right, like how much punchier and livelier do those feel? Let's listen to the context. Okay, zero in on kind of the kick and the snare, the do, cat, and focus how when I engage this, you'll notice those just cut through a little bit more immediately. Okay, that's feeling good. Let's go ahead and dive into some of these individual tracks on the drums. I'll often do kick, but I feel like I'm liking the sound of this kick, kind of the shape of it. Sometimes I use it to make the kick cut through a little bit more, make it pokier, but I think this kick is working fine in that regard. I think we could dial it on the snare drum to get it to cut through a little bit more, so I'm going to throw one on the snare top here. And I'm going to use the Studio FET. This is an 1176 style. Go around 3-to-1 on this one as well. Turn auto gain off. Always turn auto gain off. And then let's start with it around 15 milliseconds. That can work on individual snares as well. Slow down the release a little bit. So what I'm watching is for this meter to kind of fall back in time. So like in time with the hits. So that's what I'm going for there. And then dial in a little bit of the distortion here. Output gain down just a little bit because that adds some volume. Yeah. Listen to the context of the mix. When I engage this, that snare just cuts through a little more. So off. Yeah, huge. Much better. Okay, let's go in this drum room. I love smashing drum rooms with compressors. It's huge. Okay, so drum room here. Let's do that Studio FET as well. I'm going to go with a really fast attack time. I really love, this is 1176 style. I really like that style of super fast compression on drum rooms. Really high ratio, so the intensity is crazy. Auto gain off. We'll do a little bit of makeup gain once we get the threshold set. So I have a super high ratio. Let's go even a little bit higher, somewhere around 20-to-1. Really intense. We're getting a lot of compression here. Again, I like the sound of this audio. I feel like the timing of that is pretty good. What I'm wanting here is for it to basically turn down the big hits and then let up and let breathe the sound of the room in between the big hits. So it feels less like any sort of direct mic and more like just the feel of the room that's in between those big hits. So use some makeup gain here. Turn on a little bit of this distortion to get a little saturation. Dial the output back down. Okay, so before... Crazy, right? Let's listen to that in the context of the full drum sound here. Turn that off. I mean, that's starting to feel kind of like a real room, right? Now, I actually think I want to EQ real quick before this. I feel like there's some sub in that. I just want to cut out some of that sub. Okay. Just a little housekeeping thing I should have done before. Okay, so now... off. Now, I will say in the context of the drums, I feel like it's a little bit extreme. So now what I want to do is just dial the mix up. So this is just going to be no compression at all. And as I dial it this way, it's going to be all compression. So somewhere in between here, I can just blend this. So Let's listen in the context of the drums. I'm liking that. Off, on, cool, that's awesome. Okay, and then let's do one more thing. Let's do parallel compression. I don't always, well, I would say I almost always do parallel compression. The idea with parallel compression is you have your main drum sound and then you have a super over compressed signal that you're blending up into it. And you can make this a really flat and fat with a fast attack time to blend up and make the drums fatter. Or in this case, I'm going to make it even a little bit punchier by having a slowish attack time to let those initial hits through. So the way we're going to do this is go to the individual drums here. Sometimes I'll do all my toms and everything. I think in this case, no, let's go and do all the toms. No, we'll just do the kick and snare. I think in this case, I just want the kick and snare to cut through a little bit more. And we're just going to go to buses, go down to 11. And we're just going to send that completely. And I am doing in the default setting, which will follow the volumes that are set here. So I'm sending it completely 100%. So I just held option and set all these to 0. And then because it is what's called post pan, it's after the volume set on these faders, so I keep the same relative balance from my kicks and my snare top and snare bottom. And then that creates a new track all the way over here. We're gonna just title this P comp. And then I can right click on it and hit create track, which will bump it back over by the drums here. And we'll also see it over by the drums over here, although I wanna move it down below the drum bus. There we go. Okay, so this is parallel compression. We're gonna go ahead and throw a compressor on here. Listen to this in solo. And what I wanna do, I like this bus style compression from this vintage VCA here. Auto gain off. We're gonna make it really extreme again. Somewhere around 10:1 is kind of my preference for parallel compression. And then attack time around 15 is probably good. And yeah, we'll go with this release time here. And I just want to get it where it's really, really spiky. I'm actually going to speed it up a little bit. And I'm going to slow down this release. So it's kind of turning down everything in between the hits. So this is basically just becoming a super spiky drum sound. All right, so we are around the same volume here. Dial in a little bit of distortion. Turn down the output gain a little bit. Okay, so off, on, and then let's blend this in with the drum signal in the context of the mix here.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out of the figure. Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud. All getting sicker.
Don't necessarily need a lot of this. So notice when I mute this, how the drums, if you focus in on the kick and the snare, they just get lost a little bit in the mix. They're still cutting through, but they just get lost a little bit in the mix. So this is in, out. It's subtle, but it definitely helps him just cut through a little bit more. And you can blend that up to taste. Some mixes I need it more if it's a really dense mix. In this song, I don't really need a lot of it. Okay, let's just listen really quickly to what we've done with these drums with just these variables. So we kind of listened to parallel compression before and after. Let's just listen to just these drums here and check this out. I'm gonna have it on and then I'll turn it off and notice how the drums just kind of get flat. Check it out. Flat, lifeless. Much livelier, cooler sounding. Off, on. Okay. Yeah. It's subtle, but it really, really makes a difference. So that's drum compression. Let's go ahead and move on to this bass here. But really quick, before we do that, if this video is helpful so far, if you already feel like you're getting value out of this video, could you be sure to like it? That really helps let YouTube know that more people should see this video, that will be helpful to them as well. So be sure to like it and let me know in the comments, because YouTube loves comments as well. And I love comments, just knowing if you're already hearing a difference in what we're doing. So be sure to like and comment, and let's go ahead and get back into it. So with this bass, we just want to contain all the peaks so that the low end feels really consistent in our mix. So let's go back to this section here. I'm going to throw a compressor on here, and I really like this vintage Opto on bass. or the FET. The FET is pretty aggressive, so we might dial it in and just kind of listen to the two a little bit. So we're going to go a little bit intense here, not too intense because I don't want to really smash it down, but somewhere around 3-1. And then I'm going to make it a much faster setting because I want a little bit of those hits to cut through, but mostly I want to just contain the dynamics of this. And then I think auto is going to work fine for me here. Lower the threshold, so I'm getting less compression. But just notice how on some hits, it's spiking up more, and that's really going to make it much more consistent. It's just going to smooth it out. Turn auto gain off. Down a little bit of makeup gain. It looks like we already did, so I think we're good there. And then I'm going to dial in a little bit of the saturation. So listen to the context.
Just to get out, yeah, just to get out. Out of the figure. Now you say you're proud, yeah, you say I'll get a cigarette.
So I think I'm actually just wanting to bring this bass up a little bit. Let me do that first. And then I think I need to dial this output gain back down just a little bit more.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the figure. Now you say
Yeah. So if you're listening on good headphones, you'll notice as soon as I take off this compression, the low end kind of disappears a little bit. It's just less consistent. Whereas when this compressor is engaged, it's much more consistent. It's much more even.
just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the figure. Now you say
I do want to let a little bit more of those initial hits through. So I'm going to slow the attack time down just a little bit, dial the threshold back down to get around the same amount of compression. Cool.
I'll get a cigarette, yeah.
And I don't even think I'm going to mess with this vintage opto. I think on this bass, I'm liking the sound of the Studio FET. Okay, so I'm digging that. Let's go and look at the guitars. Now with the guitars, sometimes I'll compress on individual channels, but in this case, I actually think I just want to do a little bit of compression on the guitar bus, and it's just going to move them together a little bit. Now, one cool trick is that we can do this with dual mono, which means that it's going to treat the left and ears independently. But if we hit couple here, it will set them together. So we can set them once, but it will listen to them independently. So if the guitar on the right ear just gets a little bit too loud, it will turn that down a little bit more, or it'll let it cut through in a different way. You get the idea. It lets it breathe the left and right more evenly, but it contains them at the same time. So let's go ahead and dial this in where you have it set to couple. We're going to turn auto gain off here. And I really like, again, the FET, the 1176 style, and around 10 to 15 milliseconds seems to be a sweet spot for me on electric guitars. So let's listen to this in the context of the mix here. And yeah, we'll keep everything else the same. It would be really pokey. Okay, this one's subtle, but really focus in on the guitars and notice how they just kind of cut through a little bit more. Those initial hits are like, dad, cat. They just feel livelier.
Just to get out, yeah, just to get out. Out of the figure. Now you say you're proud, yeah, you say you're proud. I'll get a cigarette, yeah. Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
Yeah, I'm definitely liking what that's doing. Okay, so that's our guitars. I'm not going to do anything on any individual tracks here. Let's listen to this piano and see if we think. Sometimes I'll do a slow attack compressor on a piano to help it cut through. Yeah, let's see if we can bring it out just a little bit with a little bit of slow attack compression here. And I'm going to do, I like opto on this. So I think this has a great sound already. I think it's cutting through. It's doing what we need. So see if you can find this sound in the mix. And notice when I engage this compressor, it's going to cut through a little bit more. So we'll start with it off, and then as soon as I engage this, you should be able to hear it a little bit better. So it's just turning down after that initial hit, so that hit cuts through, and then it gets turned down a little bit, and that's making it punch through and cut through a little bit more in the mix. So when people say overcompressed, I think they're missing the idea that it can be used to shape it in a way that's really cool and isn't necessarily just always containing it, but shaping it so it cuts through in the right way in the mix. Okay, we're not going to do anything on these synths here because they're more textural elements. Let's go ahead and get into vocals, which I'm sure is something a lot of people are like, how do I compress vocals? Okay, so let's listen to this vocal here.
Just to get out, yeah, just to get out. Out of the thick of it.
Now, what you'll notice is like the out of the thick of it, the it is kind of lost in the mix. So what we want to do is clamp down more on the louder words and let those quieter words come through a little bit more. Again, believe it or not, I'm going to use the Studio Fed. I love the sound of this thing. An 1176 style compression is my go-to. Now, a thing to know about 1176 compressors, like real ones, is their slow setting is, I think, 900 microseconds or whatever it is, which is, it's less than 1 millisecond. So it might be 800, 900. So I tend to set these around 1 millisecond as my attack time. I like the slowest attack time on a 1176 compressor. And then I typically keep it around 50 milliseconds, which is the fastest release on a 1176. And on a vocal, I tend to go pretty aggressive, somewhere around 4-1. Sometimes I'll go higher, or sometimes I'll just stack compressors and get crazy. But here, we're going to see if we can get this to sound the way we want it to with just the one compressor. So initial thoughts are that that might sound a bit aggressive. I'm dialing in my distortion right off the bat because I want to hear that. But let's listen to this. Now, what you're looking for is that it's just not compressing any on words that it doesn't need to be compressing on. Okay, so that was turning it down quite a bit because we hadn't dialed up any makeup gain yet.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud. We're all getting sick of it, yeah.
Now, with this vocal and this mix, I feel like it's
Just
maybe
to
making
get
it
out,
a little bit too bitey in the high end. Let's listen to a couple of these other emulations.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud. Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud.
Let's just try and turn off the distortion, see if we like the sound of that
Just to
better.
get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
Yeah, I think there's something in the distortion that just isn't working on this particular vocal. So always trust your ears. Even if you know you've liked the way this has worked on something else, sometimes you just have to switch it up, which is what's happening to me right now.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
But check out,
Out of the thick of it.
it's kind of crazy. Okay, let's listen to it before and after. And we're just going to do the same phrase here. And notice specifically the last word, thick of it, the it, how that just gets lost when this compressor isn't on. And how just generally this vocal is cutting through more with this compressor on. So we're just going to do the first phrase twice. This is without compression.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it.
And with compression.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying
I mean, it's cutting through way, way more. And it's not any louder at any given point. It's just more contained. So the loudest point is actually turned down a little bit. And that quieter stuff is getting brought up because we have that fast release time. Okay, so happy with this on the lead vocal. We're going to use this as the starting point for the double. But I might actually speed up the attack time even a little bit more so that it's really, really clamping down on the double.
just to get out, yeah, it's just to
Let's
get
look at the
out.
setting here.
Get out of the thick of it. And now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're
Got a
proud.
little bit of tuning there for sure.
We're all
Dial this
getting
threshold down
sick
just a
of
little
it,
bit.
yeah.
Cool. And then let's listen to this with the lead vocal here.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
I'm actually going to leave the attack time where it is. Let's go ahead and copy this to the left and right double. and check those. Just make sure they're kind of getting the right amount of compression on each of them. So this is the left here.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
Bring the threshold down here.
Get out of the thick of it. And now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud.
So funny. In context, I'm not noticing in that tuning, but in the solo, you're like, oh, I can hear a little bit of tuning on that vocal. But in the context, it's not noticeable at all, in my opinion.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
Okay, so now that those are set up, let's listen to these vocals. I'll go ahead and listen to all 4 of them with it off, and then I'll engage it for all 4 of these vocals here. So this is off.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
And then on.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud. All getting sick of it, yeah.
So much more even, nothing's really getting lost in the mix, and they just feel a little bit fuller, right? Okay, definitely digging that. There's these other vocals here. For the sake of time, I'm not going to dial them in just because I would do it exactly the same way and I want to be respectful of your time. But let's look at these backing vocals because I would do these a little bit differently. So these backing vocals are just woes. And really, all I really need to do here is contain the biggest peak. So we're going to do a dual mono again because I want it to treat the left and right differently. If it needs to compress a little bit more on one side or the other, I want it to do that. We're going to hit couple here. And then I tend to really like this vintage opto on vocals. We'll see if that works for us today. Turn auto gain off. And we'll have a fairly fast attack time here. It doesn't need to be super fast, but I do want to contain the biggest peaks. And then a 2-to-1 ratio is probably good. Might scale it up closer to 3-to-1 though. There we go. So what you're seeing here is that it's turning down the louder words more, not turning down the quieter words as much. So they're benefiting from that makeup gain, making the quieter words louder. So it's more even and consistent. So okay, so let's finish out because now we've hit every single track here that needs it except for a couple of those backing vocals, but more or less every single track here. Let's finish out by listening to this static mix here compared to after EQ and compression. Check it out.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out. Out of the thick of it. Now you're saying
I mean, that's crazy.
yeah, you're saying you're proud. All getting sick of it, yeah.
So much more balanced, so much livelier, right? The difference just between static mix, adding in EQ on individual tracks that need it, compression on individual tracks that need it, we're getting more fullness, more punch, more clarity. There's kind of a weird honkiness when I go back to that static mix. Just listen to this.
Just to get out, yeah, it's just to get out.
Kind of honky,
Out of the thick of it.
much clearer.
Now you're saying you're proud, yeah, you're saying you're proud. All getting sick of it, yeah.
Drums feel way less flat, they're punchier, they're livelier. It just has completely enhanced the mix, and we haven't even done any effects. There's no reverb, no delay, nothing like that creating space in this mix. All we have is the tracks that have been set, level set. We've done EQ and compression on the master track, EQ on individual tracks, and compression on individual tracks that need it, and that's a difference that we've already made. So if you don't already have my 6-step checklist to a pro mix, be sure to pick it up. It's going to go through all the steps we've done and the next few steps that we haven't even gotten into yet, and you can reference it anytime that you're working on a mix in the future. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Is that change pretty noticeable to you? Let me know in the comments below. If this video was helpful and you think it would be helpful to other people, be sure to like it because that really helps make a difference, and be sure to leave a comment and subscribe so that YouTube just knows that this video is actually helpful and should be in front of more people. If this video was helpful, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you next week where we're going to start putting effects in this song.
One